Nobody told you this, but most people decided who you are within about 11 seconds of meeting you. Not 11 minutes, 11 seconds. And here's the part that should genuinely bother you. They were mostly wrong. They filed you under a label that had nothing to do with your actual depth, your actual intelligence, your actual character. And then they walked around for the rest of their lives treating that label like it was the truth. That's not a personality problem. That's a memory problem. And memory problems have solutions. Stay with me for the next 11 minutes, because what I'm about to show you is not a confidence hack. It's not a social skills tutorial. It's something closer to the actual operating system behind how human beings remember each other. And once you see it clearly, you will never walk into a room, or out of one, the same way again. Let's start with something most people never say out loud. There is a specific, quiet terror in being forgettable. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in small moments. Like when you say something in a group and nobody responds, and then 30 seconds later someone else says almost the same thing and everyone laughs. Or when you've met someone 3 times and they still don't quite remember your name. Or when you're sitting across from someone you actually like, having what feels like a real conversation, and you can already sense that by next week this whole thing will have dissolved into a blur for them, like you were never really there. That feeling is real, and it's more common than anyone admits. Because admitting it feels like admitting something embarrassing, like admitting that you don't matter. But that's not what it means at all. What it actually means is that you've been operating without the right information. So let's fix that. Here's the first thing you need to understand. And this one is going to rearrange something in your head. Your brain does not record your experiences. It reconstructs them. Think about that for a second. When you remember a conversation you had last week, you are not pressing play on a recording. You are watching your brain rapidly build a story using fragments. Emotional fragments, sensory fragments. The feeling at the end, the one moment that felt most intense. Your brain stitches these together into something that feels like a memory, but is actually more like a painting, an impression, a story your nervous system decided to keep. This is called constructive memory. Plain English, your brain is a storyteller, not a camera. And storytellers make editing decisions. They keep the dramatic parts. They drop the flat parts. They build toward a feeling. Now here's why this matters for you specifically. When someone walks away from a conversation with you, their brain immediately starts editing. It starts building the story of who you are. And that story is not built from a complete, objective recording of everything you said and did. It's built from maybe 2 or 3 moments that had enough emotional charge to get flagged as important. Everything else, the small talk, the pleasantries, the transitions, the filler, all of it gets quietly deleted. So let me ask you something, and really sit with this one. In your last 10 conversations, what was the most emotionally vivid moment you created? Not impressive, not clever, just real, just charged, just alive. If you're having trouble answering that, you've just found the source of the problem. And before we go any further, I want to say this because I mean it. If something in what I'm describing is hitting close to home, if there's something you've been carrying around about feeling invisible or misread or somehow perpetually just beneath the surface of being truly known, drop it in the comments. Tell me your story. I read those far more than people expect. And some of the most important videos I've made started as a single comment from someone who was brave enough to say what they were actually going through. Your comment could become a video made specifically for you, specifically for what you're dealing with. So don't hold back down there, okay? Back to the mechanism. There's a principle in psychology called the peak end rule. This was studied extensively by a researcher named Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize largely for work connected to how human beings actually experience and remember things, as opposed to how we think we do. The peak end rule says this: your brain does not average out an experience to decide how it felt. It doesn't add up all the moments and divide by the total. Instead, it takes 2 snapshots. The moment of greatest emotional intensity, the peak, and the very end. And it uses those 2 snapshots to construct the entire memory of that experience. Plain English, the peak and the ending are almost the entire story. Everything else is filler. Think about a dentist appointment. Maybe it was 40 minutes long. Most of it was tolerable. But there was one moment, maybe 2 minutes, where something genuinely hurt. And the appointment ended with a slightly uncomfortable conversation about flossing. Now ask yourself, how do you remember that dentist? you probably remember it as worse than it actually was overall. Because that painful peak and that slightly flat ending are the two snapshots your brain used. Now flip it. Think about a movie you loved. It had some slow parts. Maybe the second act dragged a little. But there was one scene that genuinely moved you. And the ending landed beautifully. You walked out glowing. And you told people it was incredible. Because the peak was real and the ending stuck the landing. That's the rule at work on you. And it's working on every person you interact with every single day. Which means the question is not, how do I make every moment of a conversation perfect? Because that's impossible and exhausting, and nobody does it. The real question is, how do I create one genuine peak? And how do I build a strong ending? Those two things, just those two, and you will change how people remember you forever. But here's the problem. And this is where it gets really interesting. Most people are accidentally engineering the wrong peak and the worst possible ending. Here's what typically happens in a social interaction. Two people meet. They warm up slowly. The conversation builds to something real, something actually interesting, and then neither person knows what to do with the momentum, so they both kind of back off. They return to safe territory. The ending is usually some version of trailing off. One person checks their phone. Someone says, anyway, and you both go your separate directions carrying a slightly deflated feeling. Your brain filed that interaction under fine, pleasant, nothing special. And you became, in that person's memory, fine and pleasant and nothing special. Not because you are nothing special, but because the architecture of the conversation delivered exactly that emotional message at exactly the moments that matter most. This is not your fault. Nobody teaches this. School does not cover the neuroscience of impression formation. Your parents probably didn't talk about it. And every social confidence course you've ever seen focuses on the wrong things. The handshake, the eye contact, the opening line, the volume of your voice. All of that is the middle of the movie. The part the brain is most likely to delete. Let's talk about why the standard advice fails so completely for certain kinds of people. There's a specific type of person I want to talk about here. And you might recognize yourself in this. There are people who process the world more deeply than average. They don't just skim the surface of an interaction. They're taking in the emotional undercurrents, the subtle shifts in tone, the unspoken tension, the micro-expressions. They're running a lot of data simultaneously. And because they're running so much internal data, the surface tends to stay quiet, calm, composed, sometimes even flat. On the outside, they look low-key, maybe hard to read. On the inside, they are anything but. There's a concept in psychology called Vantage sensitivity. Plain English, some people are wired to respond more strongly to everything. Both positive and negative experiences hit harder, register deeper, stay longer. Like having the emotional dial set a few notches above average without choosing it. The same sunset that makes most people think, nice, makes someone with Vantage sensitivity feel something closer to moved. The same difficult conversation that most people shake off by the end of the day is still replaying for them at midnight. And here's the critical part. People with this trait, this heightened sensitivity to everything, they learn very early that showing all of that tends to create problems. They get called too sensitive, or too intense, or too much. So they learn to compress, to contain, to present a calm surface even when there's a storm of processing happening underneath. And the result is a gap between who they actually are and what the people around them actually experience. A person who is extraordinarily rich on the inside, genuinely interesting, genuinely complex, coming across as pleasant but forgettable on the outside, that gap is not a character flaw. It is the completely understandable result of an intelligent person adapting to environments that didn't know how to handle them. There's another piece of this, something called low latent inhibition. Latent inhibition is your brain's filter. It's the process by which your brain decides what sensory and emotional information to let through and what to block out. If you have high latent inhibition, you're filtering a lot. You move through the world efficiently. Things don't snag you. You process what's relevant and ignore the rest. Low latent inhibition means the filter is looser. More information gets through. You notice things other people walk right past. The texture of a room. The slight edge in someone's voice. The way a conversation has a direction even before anyone has said anything meaningful. The irony buried inside a joke that nobody else caught. Plain English, your brain is a wide, open receiver. It picks up signals that most people never detect, like having a radio antenna that picks up 3 times as many frequencies as the standard model. This is a remarkable capacity. It's connected to creativity, to empathy, to problem solving at a high level. Researchers have found it's disproportionately common among people who end up doing genuinely original work in any field. But in a social context, running all that extra data means your processing power is mostly pointed inward, and the outward expression, the thing the other person actually sees, gets less bandwidth. So the other person is left sensing that there's something there, something interesting, something worth knowing. But they can't quite reach it. And rather than push, most people just move on. And you get filed away as nice but unremarkable. None of that is accurate. But accuracy is not the point. The point is what their brain constructed. And what their brain constructed is the only thing that matters for how they treat you, think about you, and remember you going forward. So let's build a framework that actually works for this kind of person. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Think of most people in social settings as houses with the front door wide open. You can see everything immediately. The layout is clear. You know what you're working with in the first 30 seconds. There's nothing hidden, and that's completely fine. It makes for easy, frictionless interaction. Now think of yourself as a house where the front door opens into a beautiful entry, but behind it are hallways and rooms that almost nobody sees. Not because the doors are locked, but because you've never been quite sure whether visitors were actually interested in going further, or whether it was appropriate to show them, or whether opening those rooms would create problems you didn't want. And so most people who come to visit you experience a very pleasant entry, and then leave, never knowing that the most interesting parts of the house were 10 feet behind the first hallway. The goal, and this is the whole shift, is not to remodel the house. It's not to tear down walls or throw open every door at once. The goal is simply to become more comfortable, more intentional about opening one more door than you usually do. Just one. In the right moment, with the right person. Because here's what happens when someone gets even a glimpse into a room they didn't expect. They become curious. And curiosity in human psychology is one of the most powerful emotional states there is. Curiosity is the brain saying, I am not done processing this yet. I need to come back to this. Curiosity is what makes something stay in someone's mind after the conversation is over. Curiosity is what makes them bring you up to a friend later. What makes them want to see you again. What makes them, in a very real sense, remember you. Being curious about someone is not the same as being impressed by them. Impressed is a fast, clean feeling. You assess, you feel it, and curiosity lingers. Curiosity pulls. Curiosity builds a narrative around a person that keeps evolving. So the question becomes, how do you generate genuine curiosity without performing, without pretending, without turning yourself into some kind of calculated social project? The answer is simpler than you'd expect. And it goes against almost everything the social confidence industry tells you. Stop trying to be interesting and start being interested in a way that's genuinely you. That distinction sounds subtle, but it's everything. When you try to be interesting, you're performing, you're presenting content, you're managing how you come across, and people sense the effort. It creates a very slight but real distance, a slightly transactional feeling, like you're trying to sell them something, when you're genuinely interested, specifically in the things that actually ignite something real inside you, and you let that genuine interest be visible without apology, something completely different happens. The other person's nervous system picks up on authenticity. And authenticity is the rarest thing in most conversations. It's so rare that when someone encounters it, even briefly, it registers as extraordinary. So let me give you the 4 things. 4 specific design choices, not tips, not tricks, not techniques to memorize and perform. Design choices. Ways of setting up the architecture of an interaction so that the right peaks get created and the ending lands with weight. The first one is what I call the honest interrupt. Most conversations move along a kind of invisible script. You know the script. Small talk about how things are going. Mutual acknowledgement that things are busy. General pleasantness. Safe observations about shared context, the weather, traffic, whatever the shared external reference point is. Most people follow this script almost automatically. And the script is, by design, emotionally neutral. It exists to create safety, to establish that we are not a threat to each other. That's its function. And it serves that function well. But the problem is that most people never leave the script. They stay in the safety zone for the entire conversation. And safe, as we've established, is the enemy of memorable. The honest interrupt is simply the choice to step briefly off the script with something that is actually true, not dramatic, not confessional, not inappropriately heavy, just honest. Like when someone asks, "How are you?" And instead of saying, "Good, busy, you know how it is," you say, "Honestly, I've been thinking about something weird lately and I can't shake it." And then you name the thing, briefly, genuinely. Or in the middle of a perfectly pleasant conversation about something neutral, you notice something real and you say it. Can I say something that might sound a little strange? I actually find this genuinely fascinating, and I don't meet many people who think about it. And then you go there, into the real thing. The honest interrupt does three things simultaneously. It elevates the emotional temperature of the conversation above neutral. It signals that you are a person with actual inner life, not just social function. And it gives the other person permission to be honest too, which is something most people are quietly desperate for and almost never get. That moment, that brief departure from the script, is almost always the peak the other person's brain stores. The second design choice is what I call the weighted pause. We live in a cultural moment that is terrified of silence. Silence in conversation feels like failure, like awkwardness, like someone needs to fix something immediately. So people rush to fill it. And in rushing to fill it, they dilute every meaningful thing they just said. Here's the truth about silence that almost nobody tells you. Silence is the moment the other person actually absorbs what you said. When you say something real, something that matters, and then you immediately follow it with more words, you're covering it. You're giving the other person's brain no time to land on it. It floats past and dissolves. But when you say something real and then you stop, and you let the quiet sit for 2 or 3 seconds longer than feels comfortable, something different happens. The other person's brain has to do something with what you just said. It can't just move on, it has to process. And that processing is emotional. And that emotional processing is what creates a memory. The weighted pause is not dramatic silence. It's not a power move. It's just the simple act of trusting that what you said was worth a moment of space. Try it once. Say something that's actually true for you. And then stop. Don't fill it. Don't apologize for it. Don't explain it to death. Just let it be there. You will be uncomfortable for about 3 seconds. And the other person will say something more real than they were planning to. Almost every time. Because your stillness communicated that this was a real conversation. And real conversations make people feel safe enough to be real back. The third design choice is the specific acknowledgement. Generic validation is one of the most common and most useless things that happens in social interaction. Someone tells you about something they're working on and you say, "That's so cool." Someone shares something personal and you say, "I totally get that." Someone expresses something they're proud of and you say, "Good for you." These responses are not bad, they're just empty. They signal basic human acknowledgedness, nothing more. And your brain, and theirs, knows the difference between real acknowledgement and social noise. The specific acknowledgement is when you actually listen. And then you name something specific about what you just heard. Not, "That's so interesting," but, "What? The part where you said you almost quit, but you didn't, that's the thing I'm still thinking about. What made you stay?" Not, "I totally understand," but, "That thing you described, that feeling of being prepared for everything except the thing that actually happened. I know that feeling from a completely different context, and it's one of the most disorienting experiences there is." Specific, real, responsive to what they actually said rather than to a general category of thing they said. When someone receives a specific acknowledgement, something shifts in them. They feel heard. Not just acknowledged, actually heard. And being actually heard is so unusual in most people's daily experience that it registers as remarkable. It registers as, "This person is worth knowing." That registration becomes the emotional peak, and the emotional peak is the memory. The fourth design choice is the clean exit. This one is the one most people resist most strongly because it goes against a very deep social instinct, which is to stay until the natural end. Here's the problem with staying until the natural end. Conversations don't have natural ends. They have death spirals. The conversation peaks, and then it starts to deflate, and both people feel it deflating, and both people try to hold it up a little longer, and it gets slightly more forced, and slightly more polite, and slightly less real, and then eventually someone checks their phone or looks over your shoulder or uses the word anyway, and the whole thing limps to a close. And that death spiral, specifically the final few moments of it, is the ending that the brain files. The peak end rule, remember. The ending is half the memory. So if your ending is a slow deflation, that is the taste the other person's brain carries away. And bland endings make for forgettable people. The clean exit is the choice to leave on the upswing. To identify the moment when the conversation is genuinely warm, when something real just landed, when both people are still engaged, and to wrap up from there, before the peak has passed. You don't do this coldly. You don't do this abruptly. You do it with warmth and specificity. I have to get going, but I genuinely enjoyed this. That thing you said about the way people mistake business for direction, I'm going to be thinking about that. And then you leave. Clean. Clear, while things are still good. What happens in the other person's brain is remarkable. Because the last note of the conversation was warm and specific and memorable. And the final image they have is of someone who valued the conversation enough to say something real about it and then left cleanly before things got stale. They will think about you, I promise. They will. Now here's the warning, the thing nobody tells you when they give you tools like these. The first few times you try any of this, it is going to feel profoundly wrong. Not a little uncomfortable. Wrong. Because you have a deeply established nervous system pattern for how social interactions are supposed to go. Your brain has been running the same operating system for years, possibly decades. And any deviation from that operating system is going to trigger something that feels like an alarm. When you try the weighted pause for the first time, your brain is going to scream at you. Fix it. Fill the silence. You're making it weird, and you'll probably fill the silence. That's okay. Notice that the alarm went off. Notice what it felt like. And try again next time. When you try the honest interrupt for the first time, you'll probably walk away second, guessing every word. Was that too much? Was that weird? Did I say the wrong thing? Almost certainly you'll feel like you overshared, even if you shared something very small and very normal. This is not evidence that it went badly. This is evidence that you moved. Movement, any movement away from a pattern that your nervous system has been running for a long time, feels like threat. It's designed to feel like threat. That's how the system protects the pattern. But here's what's actually true. The alarm is not accurate. It's just old. The alarm was calibrated to protect you in environments that may no longer exist. In rooms from your past where being too much or too real had actual costs. And those costs may have been completely real at the time. I'm not dismissing them. But you are not in those rooms anymore. And the alarm hasn't updated. So when it goes off, the thing to say to yourself is not, "You're right. Retreat." The thing to say to yourself is, "I see you. You're doing your job. And I'm okay. We can keep going." That reframe is not dismissive of the discomfort. It's just accurate. Here's one more piece of this that I think is really worth sitting with. Everything we've talked about today, the peak end rule, the emotional encoding, the Vantage sensitivity, the wide open antenna of low latent inhibition, all of it points to something that I think you might have been getting subtly wrong about yourself. You have probably been treating your depth as a liability. The fact that you process deeply, feel things strongly, notice more, hold more internally, you've probably been apologizing for that in small ways your whole life. Or at least managing it carefully, keeping it contained. Not letting it show too much. But depth is not the problem. Inaccessible depth is the problem. There's a crucial difference. Depth that is invisible is lonely and ineffective. It doesn't connect, it doesn't land, it doesn't change anything. Depth that becomes accessible, even briefly, even in a controlled way, is magnetic. It is the rarest quality in human interaction. And people are drawn to it with a force they can't always explain. They just know that talking to you feels different. That they think about it after. That something real happened there, even if they can't name exactly what it was. That feeling, that inexplicable sense that something was different about that conversation, that is the memory you want to create. And you already have everything required to create it. You are not missing pieces. You are not broken. You are not a less complete version of someone more naturally social. You are someone whose richest qualities have been largely invisible for very understandable reasons, and who now knows something about the architecture of human memory that makes it possible to change that without changing who you are at all. You are not becoming someone else. You are becoming more accessible as who you already are. That is the whole shift. So let me give you something concrete before we close. Something you can actually use. Not a technique to perform, just an orientation. Something to bring into the room with you quietly before the next conversation that matters to you. Say this to yourself. You don't need to say it out loud. Just let it settle. I'm not here to impress anyone. I'm here to be real with one person for a few minutes. I'm going to notice the moment when something actually lands, when something genuine passes between us. And I'm going to trust that moment enough to stay with it instead of moving past it. And I'm going to leave while things are still good with something honest and specific. Not a performance, not a script, just the truth of what this actually was. That's it. That's the whole orientation. And one more thing before we close, because this matters. The goal of all of this is not to become someone people find impressive. Impressive is overrated and short-lived. The goal is to become someone people find real. Because real is what the brain stores. Real is what people carry with them. Real is what makes someone say 3 weeks later, completely unprompted, "You know who I've been thinking about." That conversation I had, there was something about it. Real is what makes someone want to know you better, trust you faster, bring you into the parts of their life that matter. Real is what lasts. And the path to being experienced as real is not pretending to be more open than you are. It's creating the conditions, the peaks, the endings, the honest moments, where who you actually are gets to come forward. Briefly, specifically, in the moments that the brain actually records. Because if the brain only keeps the peak and the ending, then you only need to get those right. And getting those right is within your reach. Starting with the next conversation. If you want to go deeper on this, there's a free guide in the description that maps out your personal conversation patterns. Not a course, not a program. Just a clear, simple framework that helps you see where you're already creating genuine peaks, where you're accidentally creating flat endings, and what to adjust. It takes about 20 minutes to go through, and people have told me it rearranged how they saw themselves in social situations in a way that nothing else had. The link is in the description. And there's a video right over there that connects directly to everything we talked about today. It's about something very specific. Why the most genuinely intelligent people in almost any room end up feeling the most invisible. And what's actually happening psychologically in that room that creates that invisibility. It builds on the peak and rule in a direction I think you're going to find genuinely surprising. I'll see you there.